What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. The real story behind and of Green Gables. Since its inception, Lucy Maud Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables has captivated readers, becoming a cherished part of countless childhoods and a nostalgic part of countless adulthoods. Inevitably, many fans have wondered about the story's creative genesis. Who were the real people and events that eventually became the saga of Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert, Gilbert Blythe, Diana Barry, and the rest of the gang? Is Anne of Green Gables true or fiction? As is the case with almost all legendary fictional characters like Juana Maria, the inspiration for Island of the Blue Dolphins, and is of course a little bit of both. According to various accounts of L.M. Montgomery's life, Green Gables and its inhabitants are more than a magical and ingenious channeling of imagination. They're a composite portrait of the author, the people and places she knew, and the people and places she never knew but only read about. Read on to find out how Anne came to be spelled with an E and how an orphan named Ellen inspired an orphan who was, tragically, not named Cordelia, and was partially inspired by the face of Evelyn Nesbit. Some claim that the physical model for Anne Shirley was not another plucky and gangly redhead, as one might assume, but famous Gibson girl Evelyn Nesbit, a figure who possessed the very same flowing nut-brown hair and exquisite rose-leaf complexion that the fictional and so coveted and idealized. According to the documentary Looking for Anne 2009, Montgomery was inspired by a widely circulated portrait of Nesbit pictured above, which she probably first spotted in the food magazine What to Eat, which had just published one of her stories. The image captured a nostalgia for girlhood, a time of innocence, wonder, and discovery. Rumor has it that Montgomery tore the picture out, framed it, and frequently gazed at it as she worked. And the rest is Green Gables history. The concept of Anne came to Montgomery as a child. Anne's earliest spark appears to have come when her creator was no older than Anne herself. According to the book The Story Girl Chronicles, the adult Montgomery was revisiting her childhood journals one day when she suddenly came across an entry. Elderly couple apply to orphan asylum for a boy. By mistake a girl is sent them. And subsequently took root in the form of a short story. But, true to character, she quickly became an epic and blossomed into a novel, and was also based on a real orphan named Ellen. As it turned out, the Anne diary entry wasn't solely a spark in L.M. Montgomery's imagination. According to scholars, it was actually a reflection of an incident in the life of one Pierce McNeil, a cousin of L.M.'s grandfather, and his wife Rachel. The couple lived right across from the real-life Green Gables on Prince Edward Island, and they needed help on their farm. It seemed that the childless couple had applied to adopt an orphan boy in 1892 to help out with the farm chores. Their neighbors John and Annie Clark did the same. But instead of two boys, the two sets of unsuspecting adoptive parents found a 5-year-old boy and his 3-year-old sister awaiting them at the train station. It appears that the McNeils decided to keep the little girl, whose name was Ellen. Rather tragically, there's no record of what happened to her brother, whom both they and their neighbors presumably opted out of adopting. Researchers and historians hoping to get the whole story haven't been able to uncover any subsequent details. Montgomery was herself, partially, an orphan. Born on Prince Edward Island on November 30, 1874, Lucy Maud Montgomery was partially orphaned at a very early age, and then more or less abandoned by her remaining parent. When she was about 2.5 years old, her mother died of tuberculosis, and her father, apparently overcome with grief, left the child with her grandparents, who raised her. Em was never fully estranged from her father. She even eventually spent 1 year living with him and his new wife, but it's clear that her feeling largely like an orphan played an important role in Anne's development. Like Gilbert Blythe, Montgomery's true love caught a deadly disease. In the 1985 TV series, Anne memorably rushes to Gilbert Blythe's side as he's dying of typhus, and he miraculously recovers after declaring his love for her. In real life, however, things didn't turn out quite so perfectly. In the early 1900s, while she was teaching on Prince Edward Island, Lucy Maud Montgomery became enamored with a man named Herman Leard, who resided in the same house she boarded in. In her diaries and letters, which are collected in the book The Intimate Life of L.M. Montgomery. L.M. described Leard as the love of her life. Hermann suddenly bent his head and his lips touched my face. I cannot tell what possessed me. I seemed swayed by a power utterly beyond my control. I turned my head. Our lips met in one long passionate pressure, a kiss of fire and rapture such I had never experienced or imagined. However, Montgomery's family apparently objected to the union, and she broke off relations with Leard. Not long afterwards, he died tragically of influenza. Lem was said to have never again sought romantic love, though she did go on to marry Ewan MacDonald, a Presbyterian minister whom she was not in love with. Gilbert Blythe was probably her way of recreating Leard's death as a happy ending. The man L.M. Montgomery did marry suffered from delusions and psychosis. Though it produced 3 children, one of whom was stillborn, L.M.'s marriage was not a happy one. She regretted marrying Ewan MacDonald, even though she had been engaged to him for 5 years beforehand. Almost 10 years into the marriage, MacDonald had a mental breakdown, which was characterized by religious melancholia and delusions. He apparently believed that he was a member of the elect, a special group destined to go to heaven. According to the biography Writing a Life from Montgomery, MacDonald would go around with hair bristling, blue underlip hanging, eyes glaring and face livid, denouncing his wife and children. Tried to keep his condition a secret, but it eventually became too conspicuous to hide. Montgomery, sadly, took her own life. Though Lucy Maud Montgomery brought joy to millions, and fortunately experienced a good amount of joy in her own life, her later years were sadly not good ones. Though she continued to write about and L.M. continually battled depression. Montgomery died on April 24, 1942, at the age of 67. It was initially reported that she had died of coronary thrombosis, but in 2008, her granddaughter revealed that she had actually taken her own life via drug overdose. A suicide note, which some had initially mistaken as a fragment of a novel, read, in part, "I have lost my mind by spells, and I do not dare think what I may do in those spells. May God forgive me, and I hope everyone else will forgive me even if they cannot understand. My position is too awful to endure and nobody realizes it. What an end to a life in which I tried always to do my best. It was a tragic end to a great life and a great career, but at least Montgomery will always live on through the exuberant, romantic, and poetic Anne." Montgomery's last known work was so dark, her publisher wouldn't release it. At the end of her life, Montgomery was indeed in the depths of real despair, and exhausted from battling the depression that would eventually lead to her suicide. In fact, her final contribution to the Anne series, The Blythes, are quoted, with its themes of adultery, illegitimacy, despair, misogyny, murder, revenge, bitterness, hatred, aging and death, was said to be so dark that her publisher opted not to release it. An abridged version of the work was eventually published in 1974, and the full text became available in 2009. Unlike Anne, Montgomery didn't want her name spelled with an E. When you hear a name pronounced, can't you always see it in your mind, just as if it was printed out? I can. And Ann looks dreadful, but Anne looks so much more distinguished. If you'll only call me and spelled with an E, I shall try to reconcile myself to not being called Cordelia, and Shirley famously says to Marilla Cuthbert in the book. As it turns out, Anne's creator felt exactly the opposite way about the spelling of her own name. A passage in the selected journals of Lucy Maud Montgomery makes it clear that the author never liked Lucy as a name. I always liked Maud spelled not with an E, if you please, but I do not like it in connection with Montgomery. Maud Montgomery has always seemed to me a disagreeable combination. Anne's beloved forests, lakes, and enchanted spots were based on real places. The Lake of Shining Waters, Violet Vale, Willowmere, and of Green Gables is full of poetically named places, and most of them reflect real-life locations. According to Canada's official website, the young Lucy Maud Montgomery, who spent much of her childhood playing outside and mentally creating poetic landscapes, named the many places she came to love, just as Anne did. One particularly beloved apple tree was dubbed Little Syrup. Other names were incorporated directly into the book. Her uncle's pond was called the Lake of Shining Waters, and the forest near her childhood farm was christened the Haunted Woods, and was indeed reputed to be haunted. Die-hard fans can even tour the real Green Gables. It's a designated Canadian heritage place. Since its publication in 1908, Anne of Green Gables has charmed readers across generations with its vivid landscapes, eccentric characters, and the spirited red-headed heroine who insisted on being called Anne with an E. Lucy Maud Montgomery's beloved novel may seem like a whimsical concoction of pure imagination, but the truth is that behind the idyllic hills of Avonlea and the puffed sleeves lies a deeply autobiographical and surprisingly somber origin story. The real tale behind Anne of Green Gables is a woven tapestry of personal heartbreak, lost love, orphan legends, mental illness, family secrets, and dark creative impulses that the author buried beneath the sweetness of her heroine's voice. As much as readers like to imagine Anne Shirley skipping through Prince Edward Island's fields with nothing but sunshine and dreams in her head, the real world that birthed her was often anything but sunny, and the emotional weight Montgomery carried throughout her life bleeds quietly through the cracks in Anne's joyful facade. In fact, one might even say that Anne of Green Gables is, ironically, a book forged in loneliness and depression, crafted by a woman who understood yearning and rejection far more intimately than her readers could ever guess. To start, Anne herself didn't come to Montgomery fully formed in a dream or magical muse. Her very origins are tangled in reality and literary improvisation. In a childhood journal entry, the young Montgomery jotted down a simple idea. Elderly couple apply to orphan asylum for a boy. By mistake a girl is sent them. That was it. Just one line, a hypothetical what if, no doubt inspired by both her own upbringing and tales she'd heard in her tight-knit rural community. Years later, while flipping through these journals, Montgomery stumbled across that childhood scribble and something sparked. She began crafting the story of Anne, not as a short story which was her original intent, but as a full-fledged novel. The character of Anne refused to be boxed in. She demanded space to grow and evolve, just like the author herself had longed to do. But Anne wasn't merely fictional. Her roots stretch into the true story of an orphan named Ellen, adopted by Pierce and Rachel McNeil in Prince Edward Island in 1892. The McNeils, who were actually cousins of Montgomery's grandfather, had applied to adopt a boy to help on their farm. Instead, they were sent a boy and his younger sister, Ellen. The McNeils kept Ellen, but there's no record of what became of her brother, a tragic detail that only adds depth to the fictional world Montgomery later created. In Anne's story, the mistake leads to magic. In Ellen's, we're left with ambiguity and an unsettling sense of historical forgetfulness. Yet it was that mix of mystery and humanity that seemed to fertilize Montgomery's imagination. Anne's face, vivid in readers' minds, might also have had a real-world template. According to the 2009 documentary Looking for Anne Lam, Montgomery was captivated by an image of famed Gibson girl Evelyn Nesbit, which she found in a food magazine shortly after her story was published in the same issue. Nesbit, with her nut-brown curls and flawless complexion, represented a wistful vision of girlhood, a tender, romanticized femininity that Montgomery, isolated on the cliffs of Pi, perhaps longed to possess or reclaim. She allegedly tore the picture out, framed it, and kept it near her writing desk. Nesbit's beauty, innocence, and tragic real-life scandals may have fed into the emotional and aesthetic world of Anne Shirley. And then there's the autobiographical ghost running through every page of Anne of Green Gables. Lucy Maud Montgomery was, in many ways, Anne. Born in Clifton, now New London, Prince Edward Island in 1874, she lost her mother to tuberculosis when she was just 2. Her father, Hugh John Montgomery, devastated by his wife's death, left young Maud to be raised by her strict and emotionally distant maternal grandparents in Cavendish. Though he remained somewhat present in her life, her father essentially abandoned her, and worse, remarried, starting a new family without her. This profound sense of emotional displacement, of being both loved and rejected, informed Montgomery's entire worldview. Anne's desperation to be wanted, her elaborate fantasies of belonging, her aching sensitivity, all mirror the psychological bruises Montgomery carried since childhood. As she grew older, Montgomery found solace in books and writing. She also pursued teaching, a common path for ambitious young women in rural Canada at the time. While boarding at a home during one of her teaching stints, she fell in love with the landlord's son, a man named Herman Leard. He was funny, warm, and physically affectionate, qualities Montgomery rarely encountered in her lonely world. In her journals, she described their encounters with breathless intensity. One passage details how our lips met in one long passionate pressure, a kiss of fire and rapture. But Montgomery's family disapproved of Leard. He wasn't considered good husband material, and in the end, she bowed to social and familial pressure, cutting ties with him. Tragically, Leard died not long afterward of influenza. This real-life heartbreak may have bled into Anne's own emotional arc, particularly in the scene where Gilbert Blythe falls gravely ill and Anne realizes she loves him after all. Only in fiction, Montgomery gave herself the happy ending she'd been denied. Yet the happy ending was nowhere to be found in Montgomery's real-life marriage. In 1911, she married Ewan MacDonald, a Presbyterian minister with whom she shared little romantic connection. Though she had been engaged to him for 5 years, she later admitted she felt nothing but a dull obligation toward the union. Their relationship deteriorated rapidly when MacDonald began showing signs of severe mental illness. Diagnosed with what was called religious melancholia, he was plagued by obsessive fears of eternal damnation and the belief that he was one of the elect, a chosen soul predestined for salvation. His condition often rendered him paranoid, hostile, and emotionally abusive. Montgomery did her best to protect their children and maintain appearances, but her journals paint a bleak picture, a woman silently drowning under the weight of caregiving, secrecy, and creative exhaustion. And yet she kept writing. Despite frequent bouts of depression, what she sometimes called her spells of the Blue Devils, Montgomery turned out sequels and spin-offs, bringing Anne from adolescence into motherhood. But as Anne grew, the tone of the novels began to shift. The cheerful exuberance of Green Gables gradually gave way to darker themes of mortality, loss, and disappointment. In fact, Montgomery's final manuscript, The Blythes Are Quoted, was so grim that her publisher refused to release it in its original form. Dealing with adult issues like adultery, vengeance, and existential despair, it read more like literary therapy than children's fiction. Though an abridged version was published posthumously in 1974, the full text wouldn't see the light of day until 2009. Tragically, Montgomery's life ended the way many of her fictional characters feared, in quiet desperation. On April 24, 1942, she died at age 67 in her Toronto home. While her death was officially recorded as a result of coronary thrombosis, her granddaughter later revealed that it was, in fact, a suicide. A note was found beside her body, originally mistaken for part of a manuscript, in which she wrote, "I have lost my mind by spells, and I do not dare think what I may do in those spells. My position is too awful to endure and nobody realizes it." These haunting words echo the emotional fragility that always lay just beneath Anne's cheerful chatter and imaginative musings. Even something as charming as Anne's insistence on spelling her name with an E turns out to have been a complex reflection of Montgomery's own internal contradictions. In Anne of Green Gables, the titular heroine pleads with Marilla, "Anne looks dreadful, but Anne looks so much more distinguished." It's a moment that has delighted generations. But in her own life, Montgomery detested her given name. "I never liked Lucy as a name," she wrote in her journals. "I always liked Maud, spelled not with an E if you please, but I do not like it in connection with Montgomery." It's almost as if, by giving Anne a name she herself would have hated, Montgomery was consciously constructing a version of herself who could transcend the limitations she'd always felt, who could be light where she was dark, loved where she was lonely, and welcomed where she had once been abandoned. In the end, Anne of Green Gables is more than a sweet coming-of-age tale set in a picturesque village. It's a deeply autobiographical creation, a coded confessional written by a woman whose life was marked by personal losses, unfulfilled longings, and buried trauma. And Shirley may be fictional, but the pain and longing that created her were very real. That's why she endures. She's not just a charming girl with red hair and a big vocabulary. She's the echo of a little girl left behind by her father, the dream of a young woman who couldn't marry the man she loved, the resilience of a wife surviving a mentally ill husband, and the last desperate hope of a novelist trying to convince herself, and us, that life was still worth living. Anne of Green Gables is not a fairy tale. It's a survival story, a testimony, and perhaps above all, a love letter from the shadowed soul of Lucy Maud Montgomery to the imagined life she wished could have been hers.